calendar or the plan that's in there, and we can discuss some differences that's happened. You'll be perfectly happy to see that we have moved the presentation from next week around. So instead of going through what assignment 2 is about in a lot of detail today, we're just going to go over it briefly. We've done the full thing before the holiday, and we go into the briefing for assignment 3. Next week there's no class. But what we've done, so you have a break. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean assignment 2 shouldn't go in. So you've got to find a way around that. Next week, Thursday, there's no class. Sorry? It can be ladies' night, but unfortunately, I think ladies' night is not going to be good enough because you still have to give an assignment 2 on that day. Then what we're going to do is, on the 2nd of May, we're going to deal with things of a literature review and a lot of the theoretical aspects around the literature review. And the 4th of May, which is a Saturday, you'll see that we've scheduled from 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Okay? That is for individual consultations. Okay? On the 4th of May. So you... It must be in there. I have sent it to her. No, I'm talking about the new one that was handed out today. Is it not in there? Oh, so that isn't. I'll make sure. So let me give you the brief notices. I've sent that through. Basically, the important difference is that next Thursday there's no class, but your hand-in dates is still the same. Okay? And on the 4th of May, we've scheduled from 9 till 4, and it's 30-minute appointments, whilst allowing me to eat at some point. Okay? You can come alone, or you can bring your supervisor with. In all of your cases, if you want to come and have a meeting, please discuss it with your supervisor, so that if it's possible for them, if they want to come with, we can schedule it at a time that's convenient to them as well. So there's going to be an overall schedule. It's going to be in Professor Barry's office when it's sorted out, and hopefully she's back by Monday, and then you can book slots. Now, needless to say, from 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock, we don't have 50 slots, and we have about 50 people in the class at the moment. So first come, first serve. And we may want to talk about that, what is happening. What we're going to talk about is around what you've done so far and the issues that you might be receiving, because you're going to get feedback from your supervisors about these assignments. And it may not be exactly what you thought you were at, because we're forcing you to go at a very, very fast pace. Some of you might have done your the initial work to get your assignment 1 to be at a good quality. Some of you are just starting around there. And even at the literature, it's going to be issue. So what we're doing is we are scheduling that discussion day so that we can give individual feedback to every person. So if you want to come alone, preferably deal with that through your supervisor, so that your supervisor knows that you've scheduled an appointment and have the option. I've asked the supervisors that those of them that want to schedule appointments with you should get in quickly and make sure they find convenient slots, that they only have to be here for a certain time. So just follow up with your supervisors. The rest will be in here. Yeah?
What happens if your supervisor has never been to any of the workshops? And she's not interested? No.
Okay. There's a reason that you have access to Professor Barry's ears. Okay. And you may want to reflect on that and say that you're having some problem with the feedback. The issue really is if you don't get feedback by the end of next Thursday about assignment 1.
So our assignments are going to be sent to them?
Your assignments, if you label them the right way electronically, will go directly to your supervisor. I will go through them and I will give feedback to your supervisor. I won't give feedback to you. Your supervisor is your main contact. Some of you haven't yet been assigned formal supervisor and you have caretakers. I think is whatever, when we refer to them typically in this situation, we refer to them as people that are theme leaders. They've been assigned to take certain guidance role, but the formal arrangement will only come if your supervisor is assigned. Now, in order to deal with this, we are trying to put another form or another short form together to deal with the fact that you're receiving guidance from that person, but that this is not your formal supervisor, but there must be agreement behind that as well. Okay. Are you in that position? Have you been assigned a formal supervisor?
Yes, I do have two.
Okay, that might be a problem as well. Do you have a first supervisor and a second supervisor? Okay, then the name that you use must be to the first supervisor. Okay, because we will be sending then that to your first supervisor. In your case, if you have more than one supervisor, just make sure that Prof. Barry has a list so that we can send it to everybody. So your second supervisor will also give you feedback, but feedback not to you, feedback will all go to your primary supervisor, who will then channel it.
My main concern is he's not aware of this process. So now he's working on his line of operation. I'm following this process and then I'm caught up in between.
Okay, that is very uncomfortable, but I cannot deal with that. I think please talk to Marie-Louise. I can't, it's way outside of my scope. If you do not receive feedback from your supervisors by next week, Friday, because it basically closes off at 12 o'clock at night, then you need to raise this as well. Okay?
I wanted to find out my case is that I've already been working with my supervisor all along. Is there a problem with that?
There's nothing wrong. It means that all that is going to happen is that a lot of these things you'll be able to record much quicker, much faster, because you've already gone through that. And I think those of you that have gone a road will find it's much easier. All that we're trying to get you to do is to structure your thoughts.
But then I've only sent it to my tutor, the assignment.
Yes.
Was I supposed to forward it?
No. Within my tutor, it's going to be processed there. So if you have already worked with your supervisor and you are somewhat ahead, then all of this should be much easier. So all that this process is trying to structure your thoughts so that you can compile something and make sure that there's not an issue behind that. Anything else? Okay. So next week, Thursday, you have a break, hopefully. The break is being spent on something really productive. You might want to tell your families you're coming here and then spend some useful time working. It is sometimes very useful. Okay. Assignment 2, which is due the next week, Thursday. Who's still having problems with that? You know exactly what to do, don't you? Okay. Remember, you have to go through at least 20 meaningful articles, and you will see in that brief that we gave you about assignment 2 last week, or before the break, you have to put 20 articles into a table. Okay. You have to systematically go through them and do all of those analysis aspects that's been given into the headings. So, in any given article, do you know what's the context in which this article was done? Do you know what's the problem that drove this article? Get the thing. Do you know what research methodology was followed in the article? Do you know what assumptions and all of those questions about what was done in this article? You have to record, and you have to have at this point at least 20 meaningful articles analyzed in there.
Sorry, Doctor, just on that note, some of my primary sources would be handbooks, not this.
Okay.
There
At what level are you working?
Doctorate.
That is a big problem. That is a massive problem. A lot of people work out of handbooks. Now, from the legitimacy of sources, there's two different group of books. A handbook is something that gets written way after the leading research has been done. So a textbook is developed after things have been solidly proven to give to students. So it's very, very seldom at the cutting edge of knowledge. So your initial analysis, you may use that. But if you start getting more than 10% of your references out of a textbook at the end, you will certainly get challenged that your literature is not at the cutting edge and that your contribution therefore cannot be at the cutting edge. And the age, remember the age, you have to have that recency thing in place. So when you hand in, the bulk of your references, except for the seminal stuff and maybe some textbooks or whatever, has to be within the last 5 years. So if you have textbooks, I think the big issue and the big challenge for you would be trying to find academic references or literature around aspects. You may not find it in precisely that area, but you have to find those articles. Especially at the doctoral level, it's one of the key things that the doctoral dissertation theses get shot down. Not enough body of knowledge, cutting edge at this point. And in some fields, you're working in law.
No, in HR. You see some primary sources, you can't get away. Aldrich, for example, he's a primary source. You can't reason his invented theories.
Okay, that's why I'm saying that's seminal. There's a difference in what's seminal, but even at the time that he published, there would have been challenges in the general conversation and catfight that academic publishing is about. There would have been conversations challenging him and looking at it differently. If you come, just when we break, come down and I'll take you through how you can get references. But you have to have at least 20 of them analyzed. Who of you have not yet got 20 that you're ready with? Oops, there's some serious reading to be done, isn't there? Okay. Yeah.
Most of the articles that I get, they go, it's either in engineering, in finance.
Okay, I looked at that just now. One of the things that you want to have is academic articles around adherence to policies in government environment. So what drives the adherence to policies and procedures overall? And in that topic, you'll find a lot of articles. And you might even find articles about that in government departments. So that's the one thing.
The ones that I get is just conferences. Most of the papers that I get is conference papers.
About what?
About asset management in government. And
remember the whole thing about ping pong balls in China. Now let me quickly see if I can get my internet working here. At the moment, I just had some problem. Then I just want to show you what I mean with this. Okay. Every now and again it decides it doesn't want to work, or I haven't fed it enough or something like that. Okay. Okay, so let us deal, I think, first with the one from HR, human. I go to more, even more, then I go to scholar, then I go to advanced scholar. Okay, what topic are you working at? What is your problem area?
Competencies of labor relations practitioners.
Okay, I want here competencies, labor, okay, no, human resource practitioners, put precisely labor relationship, and I can't spell particularly well, and I want to have only articles that have been written after 2010. Go to hell. Okay, so I've got 17,300 possible ones. First one is book. There's HR competencies, and a lot of the information you'll find would be on generic HR competencies and probably matched on labor relationship. That certification, what is their competencies, what's HR competencies. You can look at this one and then you can start saying, I don't have access because I'm not booked in through university at the moment. You start looking at this and you say, okay, what do we know and what we want to do. View full text, I'm not going to publish it, so I'm not going to get access to that, obviously. But you go through that. Systematic, and you go through that, and you'll probably get a lot of references on, or a lot of work on human resource competencies, and within that you might find things that have labor relationship. I've now hooked off again, so let me get back there. And let's go through once again competencies. But I want labor relations now. Precisely. And I want to now make this much tighter, so I start, still 2010, a lot, and I run it. Now I've got 24,000. Okay. So career competencies, that's not relevant. Relationship with content, oops, I'm starting to pick other areas up. So now I've got to go back to the competencies in HR, or this is all relationship. But you have to go through that, and you will not find something that's condensed and combined and is easily digestible as in a textbook, but that's not where you're playing at this moment. You're playing at a higher level. Okay, let's quickly look at the next one. What did you say you want to go through? Let me get back to that search again. I'll keep on getting frustrated with this thing. Okay, you were looking at something called
Asset management.
okay, so we want adherence to policies, government, and you want, with the exact phrase, asset management. So what do you think we'll get here? Okay. So we have 3,800. That's probably not going to be adherence to proper procedures, so that would be quite interesting. You're looking at something to say greater performance orientation whilst ensuring adherence to proper processes and procedures. So you'll find quite a lot there that talks about adherence to processes and procedures, which is part of what underlies your problem. Okay, what government thinks, but that is going to be Indonesia. Asset management policy, what's happening, why that is not behind the scenes, why it's not working. Probably not going to. There's a lot of process here. And you go through that, but you'll find, I mean, that one, that single one there, I think would definitely get you something useful. That one I can't get in. That will be meaningful. So you won't get something that talks about asset management in South African government organizations, but you'll find something about asset management in government organizations. You'll find something about, let's go back again, adherence to policies, government, South Africa. Take that one out, totally out. I've still spelled it wrong. And now you have 18,000 articles about how people are adhering to policies. Now this is about, there's one about social health policies, which might actually talk about why people adhere to that. And you go through all of it and you'll find the articles. You don't find ping pong balls in China, you will find something that underlies it. Anybody else wants to? Is it clear? So you will not find something that's precisely exactly what you want to do. You will find something that is in the area that you're working in. So if you find something exactly in the area where you're working in, you shouldn't be working in it because a lot of other people have already been working there. Okay, so the answers are already known. As you don't want to do something where the answers are already known. What else?
Oh, I didn't get something clear. Does it mean that we are going to have, let's say I'm analyzing 30 articles. Does it mean that I'm going to have 30 tables? Or do it?
What it means, and we'll go, let me just go there. I want to go to proposals. Let's look at the assessment plan, assignment 1, assignment 2, format assignment 2. The first thing that you will fill out for it, remember, is this format. You've seen it. You will tell me what's your research problem, which may be slightly changed now. You'll talk about the authors. You'll talk about what people are researching in this area. Okay, the second part which you will find out is this one, which is the Excel spreadsheet, where you will put in any start putting paper 1, who's the author, what's the date, what's the title of the paper, in what journal was it, what type of article is it, what's the problem, what was that context, what methods are used. Now the assumptions are certainly not going to be jump out and have a subsection around assumptions. You have to read quite deeper to understand what they assume to be true. What limitations do they declare in their study? What did they found? And by assignment 4 you'll be adding concepts and theories. How is it linked to your own research? And then the full reference and the electronic source. Now what obviously is going to happen, you're going to, sorry?
I tried to check for that format.
Okay, I will just make sure that that is all up there. So what is going to happen, we're going to have a wonderful electronic document from you, and I'm going to sit there logged into the website or through a university portal, and I'm going to click on your electronic reference and I'm going to see if it goes through immediately. Check 1. Then I'm going to read through that paper, and I can read quite fast, and I'm going to pick up to see if you've got the right things, and I'm going to write some nasty comments next to it. Okay. I am going to go through quite a number of yours, so I'm going to just pick a spot. So maybe some of my comments would go back to your supervisor. Maybe some of my comments won't, in your case you won't get my undivided attention. But your supervisors may have 2 or 3 of you. And they are certainly going to go through those references and make sure that you've read those papers correctly, those articles correctly. So that's how we're going to look. And they're going to see, have you got the right author, and make notes around that. Anything else? Yeah?
I wanted to find out, it means we are going to submit 2 documents for the
There's
seminar.
2 documents. And the Word document. You can, of course, take that Word document and park it in the spreadsheet so it's a single document as well. Just fill it in on the spreadsheet because it's little blocks you've got to type out if you want to do it. Yeah?
So it means here we're focusing on one article.
No. The front is your overall, the Word document is your overall understanding of this area. So you'll be putting in, and remember, you'll see in every assignment where Reeve put your research problem. Because as you're going through the loop, you'll get more and more precise about your research problem. And you'll focus it. Maybe in the beginning, especially people that start from scratch, don't have a very clear idea of what that research problem is. But as you get it clearer and clearer and clearer, you're going to be able to restate it. So you want to prove on that first page that you have your research problem, you know what people are researching, who's writing about this type of problem, and what's the author. And at the doctoral level, that's particularly important. At the MTech level, you probably won't have such a clear focus yet, but at the doctoral level, if you can't tell me that, you're not playing in the right game. Further unhappiness. Okay. Now, I hope you're all ready because today is going to be really, really wild. This is the heart of your proposal. This is where you take your research problem and you try and phrase it into a structure that you can do research. Now, I know that it's going to sound confusing. You're going to go out here, you're going to re-watch me and see me in my absolute glory after he's taken these horrible photos of me, and you're going to go through it over and over again, and it's going to sound ridiculous. There are 4 worked examples. Those examples come mostly from construction and property, that master's level, that will be posted as well for you on the wiki. So when you start working, there are good examples of what you can do to see what is expected. So it's not going to be that bad. You have to stop me, and we'll re-go through these things until you feel comfortable what we do. We have discussed, and this is what you've done in assignment 1. You have really identified the problem area. Typically in those, you start by making a strong statement around why it's a problem, and you have substantiated it in assignment 1 from the body of knowledge and empirically. Okay? And you have come down to your research problem. Now, the first time round in your research problem, you probably find out that you used quite a lot of words and it's woolly. It doesn't really get, haven't got it nicely in a few words. You'll see later in the assignments, we start limiting the words. Then you've got to put the same problem in up to 20 words at one stage. So you can condense exactly what's your research problem. So at this point, your research problem most likely will still be a little bit vague. You still have to tailor it and make sure that you've got a research problem that's of a size that you can address that. There are many problems up there. You want to find one that's worthwhile and that you can actually do practically. Now, one of the sets of feedback that you will get from assignment 1 is going to be around the practicality of executing the research. Research is about the art of the possible. You can find a wonderful research question, but you know that you're just never going to get the evidence to put together an argument about that. Now, some of you may have really cool problems. And I think those of you, when we spoke about access last week, you know that sometimes you can have a really good problem, but actually getting access to those people and the permission to use the information is a bit difficult. So when you look at your problem again, and assignment 3 is now going to go quite deep into that, you have to be able to know where are you going to answer those questions from. First thing is going to be around your problem and hopefully you at this point. Now you're going to get your supervisor's feedback and you're going to discuss it with your supervisors. Those of you that have already come along the way would found this problem not so difficult to do. Is it? Who's been some part of the journey already with their supervisors? It wasn't that difficult to do, was it? It was a little bit difficult, but now we're forcing you to go just to the absolute core essentials. Because it's so much easier to write 5 pages about something than to try and condense it into a few sentences. Now we're trying to condense it in sentences, and it's difficult. We're not saying that it's easier because it's a short bit. It's really, really difficult to put it and condense it properly. For those of you that have done that now, for the people that have done their 150-word summary, who of you have done it before? How easy was it to use that to put assignment 1? Very easy, because that is at the heart of your 150-word summary. So if you can get assignment 1 properly done, you can basically start pulling together your little abstract that you have to hand in. You just have to be a little bit more detailed about how you're going to do the research and put a few things underneath that, but that should be fairly easy to do with your supervisor. So if you've got a grasp of assignment 1, your short abstract shouldn't be a big issue. Now you've got your research problem. Remember, a problem is something with consequences, and your research question is something with a question mark. We've spoken about this whole alignment. If you have a difficulty in looking from your problem area and somehow your research questions don't actually still address the problem area. Now if you don't check for that, it's very easy to start writing at one end, and as you continue writing, it gets slightly out of alignment. So you want to be able to check continuously that your research problem and your research question are fully aligned. And at the point that you start describing your context, your problem area is fully aligned with the research problem that you're going to be addressing later. If there's a little mismatch, if you start somewhere on the side and slowly approach the problem, you're going to have a lack of alignment. Your examiner is going to read that document, and the very first thing they're going to say is, there's no focus. There's no golden thread. All of those things go missing. So hopefully you have that already. And if you have your research problem properly grasped, you have your title. Who of you have started with your titles? Okay. A title is not something that happens very quickly. Okay. You can try and get it, and you're going to move it a few times, or you can really focus on it and make sure that when you register your title, which is by the time your proposal gets approved, it would preferably stay your title. Okay, so that becomes a bit of an issue. And ultimately, as we said, yeah?
What's the difference between the title and
The topic is, what's your topic and what area are you doing at your topic?
manufacturing?
Okay, so what in manufacturing?
I was trying to see investigation of whether the goal alignment of the workplace challenge is it's able to achieve what was set out to achieve as a toolkit.
Okay, about whether the alignment of the workplace?
Workplace challenge goal alignment toolkit.
Okay, so you are saying that the problem area or the topic that you're working about is about goal alliance in workplace, that kind of thing. That's a topic. What you said is investigation into the. Now, many people are really tense about the start of a title as investigation into. Are you at master's level? You can probably get away with it then as investigation into. So it's an action word, 2 variables, goal, and what's the other one?
The workplace challenge, the manufacturing.
Yeah, goal and alignment or achievement. So your variables are around the achievement concept and around the goal concept. In your title, you'll have at least 2 variables and something indicating the relationship to whether this is aligned, whether it leads to, whether it's influenced by, whether it's determined by, whether it's impacted on some relationship. But in your title, there will be 2 variables at least. There is going to be an action word. Investigation is some people frown on that. So it could be a model that describes this and this and this, or it could be a framework for this and this and this, or it could be a deep understanding of the relationship between this and this and this. So there's some form of action that you're trying to achieve and something around the relationship. Typically, you might also add something around the context within South Africa, within a developing world, or something like that. And you may want to ask, although I think it's frowned on at TUT, something about the method that you use, a case study or ethnographic study into, or something like that. So those words are in there, and you have to spin those words around, and there shouldn't be more than 10 words to make it very, very clear to whoever reads what you've written that this is what this is about. But a topic is around goal alignment. It's not, it doesn't have the 2 variables, it doesn't have the relationship. It just tells you in what field are you playing. Anybody else around that? Okay. So ultimately, we want to get to a situation, remember we spoke about that U model, that you have your problem area, you come down to your literature, and you actually do your contribution. And this, unfortunately, is a cyclical process. So if you think you've got your problem area really, really, really tight, and you carry on and you start developing the questions that you're going to ask, you may find, and then you do your literature review, you may find out that your problem area wasn't so tight after all. There's a few gaps in there. Or you start looking at putting your research question together, and you find out there are some things that you have to include in your problem area, you haven't got it tight. So there's an alignment issue in the center around that whole thing. And if you touch one bit, if you go through and you say, okay, I cannot do this empirical investigation, I cannot ask these questions, then you have to move everything else. Because ultimately, when we finish writing it down, it should sound so beautiful, so logically, so well aligned. But we know that it's iterative, and you're going to go up and down. And throughout the process, until the very last moment that you write it and hand it out, basically cut it at the top and flatten it out, you're going to move various elements. So you are not going to write your introduction, then write your literature, etc. In fact, your final writing of your introduction should be the very, very last thing you do, so that you can absolutely make sure that the conclusions that you read are linked to your introduction. So you start off, now you're starting to write that your initial concept of the introduction, and you start putting, but you never ever finish a single part of this process until you've ensured that it's all aligned. And you fiddle with one bit, the rest will also have to move. You might find that just by adding one specific research question, a small sub-question, you may have to expand your literature significantly, or something around that. You can't describe it. Every person's journey is absolutely individual, but you've got to do that. But the link in all of that is that single little argument, that little flow diagram. How are you going to present an argument stating, I take evidence around something from the literature, and I add to that some evidence that I've obtained empirically, and another bit of evidence that I've obtained empirically, and a bit of literature, and I can answer my research question. Now this exact pattern that you plan to answer your question, what are you going to answer first? Sometimes it's very, I'm going to look at this, then I'm going to look at this, then I'm going to look at this, and then I'm going to do this, and I'll get to my answer. It's very seldom that absolutely logically. It might be a variety of patterns. Is this clear to you? So your argument is your own individual argument. And ultimately, either thesis or a dissertation is about presenting a well-substantiated and argued conclusion. So the first thing you've got to say, it's a real problem, doing it would be cool. That's what you're busy with now. I know exactly what the literature say about it. I've added some of my own bits around it, and I can answer it, and I can support my argument. Now, any one of you, when you get, who of you have teenagers? How often do you have a slight disagreement with these individuals? Okay. They are allegedly human beings. In my personal viewpoint, my 17-year-old boy is not a human being. He's a monster of extreme. And you try and have this discussion with them. And when they're 17-year-old and boys, they don't actually formulate sentences completely. They make little grunting noises. Mommy. And this single word has to say a lot of things. So you're trying to argue a position and he's using grunts. Or you're trying, whatever, you're trying to argue a position and the person that responds to you never supply enough evidence. You know that kind of frustration when you're participating in an argument. Now I'm not meaning a downright fight. I'm talking an argued position. And whoever presents it doesn't have enough evidence or just grunts at you. So sometimes you will get a lot of feedback around the fact that instead of saying the words out and supporting it, you're using the mental equivalent of a grunt or lifting your shoulder or this mommy expression, which basically means you are so ancient, you are such an embarrassment to the human race. You do not understand at all what it is about being, a teenager. So therefore, your meaning is useless. All of those things is just conveyed by saying, mommy. Okay. And you do it as well. So in your paper, in your dissertation, wherever, you're going to end up having people say, explain this. And as my beloved boy child might think that word conveyed everything he wanted to say about it, it doesn't. You may have to explain it. So you have to pull together an argument that is solid. Every single element of that argument is solid. And if they follow together, nobody would doubt that this conclusion that you read is viable, meaning it's a correct conclusion, and it is reliable, meaning that everybody else that follows your path will get to exactly the same conclusion. There's a lot of other terms as well, but this is what you're trying to convince. So you want to be able to put together your argument as soon as possible. That doesn't mean that you can support that fact, but you know what you have to support in order to get to the end. You can do a lot by talking gently to statistics. You can do a lot by adding extra bits of information, by sending out a second questionnaire, by investigating another case study, by finding more literature. So when your argument is fundamentally sound, you can do a lot to bolster that argument. But if your argument is fundamentally rotten, you're not going to get there. This guy, all fat people or all musicians are fat. John Lennon is a musician, therefore John Lennon is fat. Is there any problem there? Which one was wrong? Because he's not fat, is it? Okay. So this argument that I want to put together that says, I want to say all musicians are fat. How am I going to go out proving this statement, the single statement, the single answer? Can I get enough evidence to prove it? It's going to be very, very difficult because this statement is not going to be possible. So if I want to prove it and I basically sample a few fat musicians, I can disprove it if you put a hypothesis very, very easily by finding one skinny musician. So you go through. There's going to be some doubt in some people's mind whether he was a musician or not. But I think that you can find enough literature to prove. And you pull the things together to come to a conclusion. So that argument, that fundamental argument, you have to be able to put together. Now, you can't start putting that argument together without understanding a lot about the area that you're doing research in. You want to know what people are saying. You want to know what's the conversation. You want to know more or less what's the results that you will get to. Because any experiment, and we've spoken about it in ethics, you are not going to start executing an experiment unless you can provide quite a lot of theoretical evidence that the outcomes that you're going to get is more or less this. It is unethical to just say, let's see about this. You've got to have a good understanding of what you're looking for and what kind. You may not say the relationship is exactly 1.1, but you might be able to say there's definitely going to be a relationship. So you have to have that knowledge. And the trick is to get to that. Now, the single thing that can get you to fail an oral defense, that can fail your whole process, is when you are raising, somebody sits there, take their glasses off halfway, this is normally what they do, and they sit like this and say, what about? Okay? You recognize that little word? A lot of people do that. Your lawyer might do that. Your husband or wife might do that. You know, it happens in a lot of arguments, and that's basically the way that you unpick an argument, is by saying, but this specific bit of evidence isn't there, and that has a really serious influence. Now, even if it's really not important, you don't want to be in a position to say, oh, it was outside of my scope. You want to make sure that nobody can say, what about? And the reason, the way you go through that, if you took a look at the top left, you've got your research problem, and you start by phrasing that as a research question. Your research question is much cleaner than your problem. You've already taken some things out of it, and you want to answer it. That's what you've done. And we're going to go through this in a few ways now. The next thing is that you're going to say, what are the possible questions within that? Who's got a research question that is clear? Who wants to have their research question discussed? Who doesn't want to have their research? Okay, what's your research question?
What causes what causes inefficiency and ineffectiveness of asset management?
Okay. What causes inefficiency and ineffectiveness of asset management? What's the first question that comes up in your mind?
Procedures.
No. What do you mean by asset management? What do you mean by that? Because you start an argument and you haven't put every reader on your page, and they don't know what you mean by asset management. There are many different interpretations around asset management. Some people would link it straight to maintenance. Some would, there's a variety of issues. So the first thing is, what do you mean with that? What do you mean with inefficiency? What terms? How are you going to determine if it's inefficiency? What do you mean with ineffectiveness? Okay. So if you start, that's the very first thing. The next thing could be, what possible causes could there be? For that, you have to go deeply into the literature, and you would start looking at inefficiencies that could have been caused by a number of other things. And you didn't say in government departments, did you? Are you going to look at that? So a question would be, in what specific context are you looking? Remember the guys that were talking about project management. That's very, very often the issue with project management. You use the word project management, but project management is used colloquially to mean a lot of different things. And just because you have a certain understanding doesn't mean that your reader will have the same understanding. So the first thing is just saying, what do you mean with project management? What do you mean with the project? In your case, what definition are you going to use? What do you mean with the management of a project? So there are some very, very straightforward things that seem so obvious. But if you put together a document and you haven't answered those things, that's where they get pulled apart very quickly. things such as sustainability. You can probably pull about at least 30 distinctly different definitions there. Okay. Who of you are investigating something else? Let me find. There in the back, you're sitting so peacefully and placidly. Yes. What area are you looking at?
Project management, critical success factors.
Okay. Success factors. How are you looking? In what terms are you looking at success? The total understanding, looking at the success in the long term, or at the stringent measures that says it's in time, in cost, and according to specifications. Are you going to include things such as the social benefits? What is it that you're going to include or not?
I'm going to develop a framework of critical success factors
Yeah.
for the implementation of the projects in a rural environment.
Okay, so you're looking at that. So probably rural environment would be. What do you mean with rural environment? I have friends that interpret rural environment to be anywhere that they cannot turn left, right, and anywhere else and find a place that serves proper coffee, a place that have food ready, and some meaningful transport. Their interpretation of rural is anywhere where I don't have all the comforts.
Mine is actually specific because I'm looking at a specific village which
Yeah.
I'm using as a case study.
So, no, but then you have to, your rural would be a wider group, but you are sampling one typical compelling case. But you have to define it. Because just using those terms, I could be one of the people that think anything that's sort of more than 20 blocks away from Hyde Park is not.
In fact, I do specify in my research that it's going to be in a rural environment, in a village in South Africa.
Yeah, but so you put that together, but your problem would probably be in rural environment everywhere, but your sampling would be that specific village, and you'd have a compelling reason why that village is the same as anything else.
But in your research, in your question, should you include all these?
You don't put it in the question. I'm not saying it's in your research question. This is in the unpacking of your research question. And I might ask questions that you think are really irrelevant. But ultimately, you want to have a full set of questions. And then when you've got those questions, you make your first decision. The blind filter we'll talk to now, that's the things that make it impossible for you to think about certain questions. Then you make your paucity filter, which says, okay, this question exists, but I am not going to go there. Simply. It exists, but I'm not going to go there. And all I have to then do is to state it in my delineation. And I'm not going to go there. So you make a list of things. I'm not going to look at the following things. Yes?
But can the positive filter be used as a purpose of coming to the research problem and the research question?
No, that is from the research problem. So you're trying to get to your research sub-questions. You're trying to get to your literature objectives. You're trying to get to your understanding of your assumptions. And your assumption is just, I believe this is the answer to this question. That's all it is.
In addition, can that be added as part of the limitation of the study?
Yes, because we'll get to that now. We'll get to that now. The very first one is about saying, not going to look at it, it's outside of my scope. And there's got to be you don't have to defend that decision. You have to, obviously your study leader, your supervisor will guide you, but there will be a number of questions that some sort can ask to you that is not going to be in your scope. So the idea is not to address it, the idea is just to know that you have to state, this is not in my scope. Okay. Yes?
I experienced something very challenging when I read the literature.
Yeah.
And then it was broad, and then some of the factors that make students to fail have already been researched.
Yeah.
And what I was looking at was just that
Okay. At a doctoral level, what you want to get is you have to have one or two of those questions, the sub-questions that you generate, that people will say, there is at the moment no answer for this. That's all you want to do. So it's very difficult in your problem area to find a whole overall research question that's totally not been answered. But one of those little questions that you can ask about it shouldn't be answered, should be unanswered up to now. There should be no. Okay, the next thing that you do with this, and we're going to go through it, please don't think you should get it by now.
Can I just ask before you proceed? Just wanted to find out, would it be okay if in my research question I would ask if there is I'm doing my topic on employee wellness.
Yeah.
So my question, I would want to find out if there is a relationship between the employee wellness and productivity.
Okay. It could be. Is there a relationship, but you won't phrase your research question, is there a relationship? The answer is yes or no. Yes? No. So what is the relationship between, could be the employee wellness and productivity, you can phrase. Your sub-question first would be, what do you mean with employee wellness? You know how many definitions there are for that. What do you mean with productivity? And it's not a right or wrong answer. It's the page that you're putting people on there. So that's...
So what you're saying is I should give a clear definition of what is employee wellness and what do I mean by
What I'm saying is before you give that definition, you have to ask all the possible questions within that area. And then you will make a decision. So the first one is very simple. It's yes, I'm looking at it. No, I'm not looking at it. The second one, and we'll get to that, you have to do an incredible amount of research, putting together, understanding that question, and then you make a decision that say, I'm going to do this research. If it's an M level and there's some literature, it could be a research sub-question. If there is enough literature, I'm just going to answer it in my literature. I'm not going to do any empiric work. I could decide, no, I'm not going to do that for a variety of reasons. And there's some literature, so I can make an assumption. In this whole argument, I need this answer, but I'm not going to find it out, and there's not enough literature around it, so I'm going to make an assumption that the following is true. Because it's very difficult to find out what are you assuming is true, but you're assuming certain answers in your overall argument that is true. So you've got to work at that. And then are some answers that you have no literature and that you're not going to do research on. And that will be the limitation. Remember that will lead to a certain limitation in your study. Limitations comes at 3 levels. It comes from the way you structure your problem. It comes from the way that you do your design. And it comes from the way that you received results from your design. So limitations of your study, this is not the full list of limitation, but this is some of the limitations. Okay. But now let's go through the detail and the pain. The first step, you've done it. Now you've got to find all the possible questions. Okay. I'm going to ask you a research question, and I want everybody to have a deep and meaningful discussion with themselves about this. And tell me what questions do I have to address could possibly exist in it. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to get a multidisciplinary approach here, because people are coming from different angles. If I tell you that there's a problem, wherever you go, the queue outside female toilets in public spaces tend to be longer than the queues outside male toilets. This is not true, for example, if you go to major sport events. What you will find is the queues then outside male toilets are much longer, and it's really delightful to watch it. But I can substantiate this empirically, can't I? I'll probably find a lot of literature around it. I will find a lot of literature that this is a problem. Now I want to phrase my research question as what causes the queue outside female toilets to be longer than the queue outside of male toilets. Question mark. What possible questions do I have to answer? Now I'm just going to pick people randomly. Gentleman with the blue shirt back there. You, looking behind you. What's the first question?
Sorry?
What's the first question I have to answer there?
Could you repeat that also?
What causes the queues outside female toilets to be longer than the queues outside male toilets in public spaces? See, I've done some scope there. What's the first toilet? First question. That's the first question. We've discussed this now. What should be the first toilet? My brain has gone drifting off into space. Yes? It could be. First thing, what's a public toilet? What do you mean with the toilet in a public space? It could also be, what do you mean with the toilet? If you start looking at, is that a single point that is an opportunity to urinate? Sorry? Are there enough toilets? That question you can say, what is the ratio of toilet opportunities compared to the ratio of people in that public space? Find in some of the older areas, they've always assumed that this is a male-dominated space. So there's lots of opportunities for men and very few for women. In the engineering department of faculty at Tukkies, initially, when I started there was 1 or 2 little toilets in a corner that you could clearly see were changed over for male toilets. Now at least they've got the story right. But there could be that. What else?
What is the gender distribution within the...
Okay, the gender distribution of them.
We look at factors why a man will take a minute in the toilet and a
Okay. One of the questions could be absolutely operations research. What is the average time that a man spent? What's the average time that a female spent? It could also be a much more qualitative question. What are the rituals that women do in what is seen as a toilet? This is a very valid question, because that's the first thing that came up in all your damn minds and you never asked it, didn't you? Yes? Oh, yeah, that's it. What activities take place? Okay?
We could also look at the time the water fills inside when you flush.
Okay, how effective are the toilets? Those are all questions. If you can ask them, that's a no. It is, how long is that toilet operational and how long is it not fit for use? Okay, something? Okay, what if it's winter? So it might be a place. Okay. Yes?
You asked about the plier. Is it the 1 plier or a 2 plier?
You can ask that. How comfortable are the facilities? I can assure you that is, now if you look at some toilet facilities, if this is a dismal little semi-porcelain thing with no proper seat and maybe a few pieces of paper, you're not going to spend a lot of time there without a mirror.
What food and beverages are served in that locality?
Around what could possibly lead people to want to use that environment?
I also think the sizing, I mean, if you take the amount of goods that you can fit in a certain amount of space and the amount of toilets that
Are they suitable? If we're talking about the queues, are we talking about the queues outside the overall space, or are you including a holding space within? The milling space in front of the mirror, Simon.
There can be more cribs and there can be toilets in a lane if you have the same amount of space.
There, what you're talking about there is you're talking about the legislation informing the provision of. So it could be there. So how many opportunities are there relatively? And are they actually interpreting the same space? How are they interpreting? Yes?
The timing of the queue, is it in the morning?
Is it a very, very sharp? How is it distributed? This is all, You're looking at people looking at it from an operations research perspective. You're looking at people looking at it from a social perspective. You're looking at a number of questions. Okay. So, yeah?
Cleanliness, how clean are the
Yeah.
toilets?
Are the toilets in any way attractive enough to want to spend time in there? And or the design of the toilets. There's an incredible amount of questions that happen in there. Now, if you were let alone, how many of these questions would you have come up by yourself? Some of them. And what you will find is that the blind filter, which is the first filter that happens in your mind, that very often you don't even know about, are things that are leads to unanswered question. It leads to a fundamental weakness in your argument. So you are making assumptions that you don't know, you have limitations that you don't know, and you're ignoring certain bodies of knowledge. So you want to have as many questions out there. And what can happen is you can have certain questions that you don't ask because in your or in the research ethics, those questions just, you don't think you should answer them. So you could say, I need to know as part of my research, because I'm looking, say, at optometry, I'm looking at various ways that people can treat a piece of rock or sand stuck within your eye. I'm looking at wonderful research. One of the things that I might want to ask is, what happens, how does these things cut a human person's eye? And what will penetrate an eye? Horrible, isn't it? Any one of you feeling comfortable about this question? But it's still a valid question. It's still a question. I might want to make an assumption about it. I might want to assume that this is exactly the same that happens if you do the same experiment to a dead pig's eye. And actually, that's what the optometrists use to pick on. They use a lot of pig's eyes. Okay. So, but this is still a question. You have to know this answer to carry on, to say that, okay, if you have a round pebble, the consequences in the way you treat it would be slightly different than when you have something that is much more sharp-edged. But there's ethical concerns. Your discomfort is caused by the fact there is a fundamental aspect of ethics in obtaining that answer. It still doesn't mean that that question doesn't exist. Okay. The next thing, there are cultural issues here. Now, apparently one of the reasons that the future Queen of England's mother isn't regarded as very, very polite is that she talks about a toilet. Now, in specific cultural groupings, just talking about a toilet is not good enough. You can't do. In specific cultural groupings, for a male person to even think about what females might be doing inside there could be an issue. Okay. So your culture itself may limit the amount of questions that you see in there. That does not mean that those questions can't be asked and that some nasty little examiner have a different cultural perspective. Okay. Then there are issues around the domain or the discipline. If you're working, say, strictly in psychology, you will maybe, and you're working with people that do research psychology, predominantly quantitative work, they will not even think about a qualitative answer. In the same people doing engineering, they won't think about a qualitative answer. They just want to know, okay, what's the time that a person, in your mind, the questions that came up was, how long do they spend in there? What's the length of the queue? How many opportunities are there? Those are the questions that come up in your mind because you're trained in a certain discipline. There's nothing wrong with it. This is just something that causes you not to see certain questions. Okay. And then you might be following a main school of thought. If you start looking at practices that drive performance, You might be following a specific school of thought about certain things that drives performance, and other schools of thought, questions that might be relevant there, you don't get them because they don't exist for you. And then also your experience. Now, every single one of these questions is important. Okay? So you want to have a wide range of questions. The fact that you're not going to answer them is not the issue. The fact is that you must be aware that they exist and be able to address them somewhere, either by saying it's outside my research, or it's a limitation, or I've got an assumption. Okay. Now what you have is this very, very long list. Now what I would recommend to you is when you start generating the possible questions in your research question, is that you talk to a number of people. This might be your supervisor, but I would really give you a serious recommendation, ask anybody else. Ask people in your field, but ask people in other fields as well, because there might be really, really obvious questions that you just don't see. So you want to have as broad a range, as wide a range as possible questions. The better range you have, the more certain you are that you've addressed every single one of them. Now what happens is you've got this whole long list of questions. Okay. First thing that you must decide now, remember, is this going to be something that I am going to do? So you look at this and you say, this is a good question, but I'm not going to look at it. It's outside my scope. You don't really have to defend it to your reader. Obviously, when you discuss it with your supervisor might recommend that some questions should really be outside of your scope, or some questions should be inside your scope. This is a discussion, but this is simply a decision. By making that decision, you have knowingly made a decision and wasn't accidentally there. Is it inside? Is it outside? So when I ask you, what are the delineations of your question, you may want to list all of the things that's going to be outside. I'm not even looking at the behavior pattern of women inside a bathroom area. I'm not even going to look at some things. Pause there. You define the scope of your research. Good question. I'm not going to pay attention to it. Okay? And that it's not honest, it's honest. You've got to be perfectly honest about it, and you don't want to be answering so many questions that you spend the rest of your life answering the questions. So it's really about making sure that you only pay attention to the ones that are really, from a Pareto principle, important to you answering that question. Okay. Important, inside, outside. Just repeating. Okay. Now, you have a shorter list of questions. Okay. And that question could be, what do you mean by toilet? What do you mean by performance? What do you mean by? And you have to start looking at this question. Now, every little question is there, and you've got to ask some questions about it. You've got to understand what this question is about. The first question is this a qualitative question, or is it a quantitative kind of question? Just knowing what it is may mean that in your form, if you're doing a mono method qualitative, you are not going to answer any quantitative questions. That is going to either be an assumption or it's going to be scoped out. Work at that. Then you want to know what is the theoretical grounding. Now in there, you want to know what literature is known about this. This guy talks about it, this guy talks about it, this guy talks about it. You basically want to know how much literature is this. Ultimately, all these bits of literature are things that you have to address in your literature review. But you've got a good feeling about what the literature now say about this question, don't you? How many definitions are there? Where am I going to look for it? The next one is very important, and that's where access becomes now an issue. You know what questions you want to answer, but where is that data? In whose head is it? In what report is it? Is there this into investigations that internal audit has done then you know the answers are in there. And you want to know if you've got access to that. So, but exactly who knows about this? Could it be that only people that live in rural environments know about it? Or could it be that project managers who implement projects in rural environment knows about it? How are you going to find that information? Or could it be that they both, or even more people have information about it? They might not share exactly the same view, but some of the ability to answer that question is in some source. The next thing is, are they good instruments, validated and reliable instruments? Now, who of you intend to design your own questionnaire? Okay. Who of you intend to use the existing questionnaire? Okay. Now, even at the doctorate level, if there's an existing questionnaire that you don't have, and remember about questionnaires, we'll have a whole session about that, because you just can't come up one morning and say, let me think about this question, let me think about that question. You have to have a very, very reasoned approach that for every single item in your question bank, you have, if you do a survey, you have to say, based on what literature am I putting that item there? How am I going to analyze it? So you've got to really know what you're putting together. Now, if you can say, I want to look at self-efficacy, so I'm going to use a general self-efficacy scale, I can offload it off the internet, and it's quick to operate, that's one thing. Or you might be, in some of the cases of doctoral study, you may want to say, listen, these instruments are damn expensive. So part of my expenses would be purchase the right to use some of that, especially people working in human resources, anything around psychology. Those instruments tend to be really expensive. Of course, people spend a long time developing them. So those instruments aren't expensive because somebody has spent quickly putting together a few questions. Every single item in that bank has been validated. It's been run a few thousand times so that people know that it measures the right thing. Ultimately, you want to know if there is some instrument. Now, in your case, it might not be a full instrument existing there, but it could be in this journal article. People have measured it. So I can use this at least as a base, or I can use exactly that set of questionnaire. At a master's level, it makes your life so much easier if you can use the existing questionnaire. Okay. So what instrument are you going to use to measure, to determine it? And do you have the skills? Now remember, I spoke about that. If you're interviewing, say your form of research, your data gathering is into long interviews with people. You're going to record that. So you're going to have a lovely discussion with somebody for about an hour. Then that is going to be recorded. If you got permission to actually make a recording of it, it's going to be coded, typed up, and then you're going to analyze it. So for every hour that you spend talking to people, it will probably take you around 8 hours to put that into words, and then some hours to analyze it. Okay. That's one thing. So the analysis in qualitative work is massive. The amount of data you have, it's not a quicker way to go around it. You have a massive amount of data that you have to deal with. How are you going to do that? Do you know how to do that? Are you comfortable, for the guys at master's level, are you comfortable with statistics? Do you know how to do that? No. Or can you acquire it? Okay, that's the other things. And about statistics, we don't have much sympathy. But a lot of the others you have. And for example, in interviews, I know of people that just cannot interview somebody else. They really, really struggle in talking to people. They're really not people. They can't make people comfortable and talk to them. So for them to design something around interviews is stupid, because they're just not going to be able to do that. Okay. Then you also have places, say ethnographic study. It takes a long time. You've got to get people to trust you. You've got to be able to spend some time with them. Now, nearly all of you are working people. Do you have time to take off a month to go and really, really understand the situation so you can do ethnographic study? A lot of this is now about practical. You've looked at this question. You look at how people answer this question. Can I do it? So, and you must be perfectly honest about that. In some cases, it could be there is definitely data, but I have ethical concerns about accessing that data. It's there. There's just no way that I can do. Yes, I can, in order to find out what the rituals that women do, I can put a camera up there. Okay? I can record it. There's some really serious ethical issues about that, though. I can also have an interview with them. Or I can send out questionnaires. Okay, so there's a number of places that there's absolute data. And so sometimes a single question can be answered in a number of ways. So you've got to be able about that and then say, ethically, can I do that? And the ethical concerns are really, really important, because this is now where you make choices. As I said, just because it's an ethical concern doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you've got to address it while you're doing it. Now you're going to make a pragmatic decision. Common sense. Am I going to do it? Am I not going to do it? That decision, typically you will discuss with your supervisor, and your supervisor will tell you, it's a good idea to do that or not to do that. You don't want to set up a research questions that you can't go around answering. That's just wasting your time, because you'll have to go back and find new questions over and over again. Or you're halfway towards answering it, you find you can't answer it. Okay, if we're starting, we're 18:35. Do you want a 5-minute break now? Nobody wants body breaks. Okay. Okay. And now remember, this is what we spoke about. Now you can make the decisions. Am I going to answer it, or am I not going to answer it? And you make informed decisions. So the better you've engaged with that question in your analysis, the more likely you are going to be able to make a decision that's doable. The reality is, you may have a number of questions coming out there to the empirical sub-questions. At the doctoral level, there should be no evidence on those things. At least one or two of them, there should be absolutely nothing. Or it could be that the final answer, there's absolutely nothing. But if you end up with more than 3 to 5 research sub-questions, you have bitten off more than you can chew. So overall, the guideline is not more than 3 to 5 research sub-questions. And if your analysis tells you, I think there's about 9 I can do, make new decisions. Take them back. Or if you only have 1 research sub-questions, it's probably not good enough to take at a master's or doctoral level. So this is decisions that you've got to make even when you first start. If you have enough literature, and now you know which of those questions you should be able to have literature. This is it. I can get to a literature question. Even your definitions, there could be some that you deal with that in literature. Now, the difference between an assumption could be that in literature, I acknowledge that there are many definitions and I make a reasoned choice. But if I make an assumption, I'm just going to say, listen, I'm going to use this definition. Finish. But you don't argue the case and you don't. So there's some literature, and I'm just making an assumption. And if if it's a really important question, I know it's part of my research, overall research questions, but I can't find an answer. This will be a limitation in my ability to answer my question. So what you're doing now is you're basically taking the whole thing through. And now with what you have left over, you have identified those literature questions, haven't you? Because you've worked out which ones you can answer. You've identified your research sub-questions. So now you have to put together your argument. In that one, I assume that I have to do the top research sub-question and then add some literature and some more literature to be able to do the next level of my research sub-question, which I have to now gain empirical data. And from the other side, I have to bring in arguments, and I've got to answer yet a third research sub-question. If I bring them all together, I can answer my research question. So you need to be able in some way, whether you use a mind map, whether you use a flow diagram, whether you use Boolean algebra, whether you use straightforward Socratic philosophy to put this together, you have to be able to present your argument. Under the boundary conditions of certain delineations, what are you not addressing, what limitations there are, and what assumptions you're going to make. What you need to do is, in that handout, you will find there's a table. Okay? You'll find the format at, I think, at the end of what you have to answer. The format in which you have to answer this question. It's not in the presentation, it's at the back. What are you going to do? And there's a place that you now, yet again, have to restate your research problem. Hopefully you've got it nicely condensed now. State your research question and generate at least 30 sub-questions. I use 30 as a guideline, but generate as many as you possibly can that has to be addressed. And then, after you've done the paucity of the address the blind filter, every single question you put into that line and you analyze it. Typically what you'll do is you also try and order the questions in the order that you're going to have to answer them. So these things I have to at least answer in the beginning of my introduction, how in the argument I'm going to do. That's not essential at this point. And as I said, there will be 4 examples of how to do that. Then you would summarize it, and in this table you have to list every single question that you will put as an assumption that has a limitation, literature review, etc. Now typically what I do to some of my students, and I know of other people that do that, is you put another column there in the end, basically saying reference, where in my thesis, where in my dissertation have I addressed this question? Just to make sure that you've got all of your text crossed. Then the final document is a little summary. We just put it together, what am I going to do about it? Sounds easy, doesn't it? Okay, we're going to discuss it again. So what you do is you have to at least do 20 questions. If you're at a doctoral level, try and up it. Okay? Get about 20 questions and complete the analysis in that format. You will see there are examples to use, but make sure that you have sufficient detail, not something that, yes, there is literature, because you still don't know what to do. Put them together properly. And the second part of this assignment is about a self-reflection, where you have to write 2 pages about what you have learned, okay? How have you followed the process? What are the issues? Have you received feedback, etc.? I think we will try and reflect that thing, that part to come straight to Professor Barry first. So we might separate those 2 documents. This assignment counts for 10% of your final mark. 8% goes towards that research sub-question, and basically it's whether you've come to these conclusions. Every single one of those is something that you have to get to. Have you done your analysis? And then your reflection is around, have you followed the process? Have you received feedback? And remember that little feedback diagram that I said that you have to record what feedback you got? How have you incorporated? Fundamentally, what you're getting to is your research objectives. You have 2 layers of objectives. You have your empirical objectives, and very often when people state research objectives, they only talk to their empirical objectives. I want to answer question 1, answer sub-question 2, and then I finally want to answer my research question. But there are also objectives that drive your literature review. So you have your literature objectives. Your literature objectives is answer the research questions, literature questions, and have enough knowledge to to answer the sub-questions. Okay. And we need to do both because we don't want you to do a literature review that you just add, throw things together. There's got to be some structure in this as well. Okay. This is not runaway time. This is let us now deal with it. Exactly where are you confused? I know this is pain, this is incredibly mechanistic, but at the end you will be able to structure your research proposal and your work. Quietness. Anybody has questions, or are you all perfectly happy? Do you understand what I've said? I see this layer of, okay, where are you confused? What specifically do you need me to expand on? Yes?
I just want to ask, with regard to this one, the separation of empirical objectives and literature objectives, would it be necessary that in your first sub-question would be to do a literature review?
Yes, and that sub-question is not to do a literature review. The first part of your argument would be to do a literature review. But to say, to do a literature review, on what? What do you want to do in the literature review? What do you want to achieve? So the first step that you will do in your argument, that's why I put it in chapter 2, is to do a literature review. But you want to know what are you going to do in that literature review? What topics you have to discuss? So typically one of the problems, if you just read it, you put this guy said this and this guy said this, then this guy said it, and you put 20 pages of this together. Instead of structuring your literature review around this topic, the following things are said. I'm concluding, or in your sub-question, around this topic, the following aspects. Therefore, in order to measure this, I will use this instrument or I'll use these factors. It's about structuring that literature review. Yes, the first step is I do the literature review. And then in your analysis, you start pulling your conclusions, you start pulling these arguments in. Remember, after chapter 2, there is no new references popping up, except you don't bring raw literature data later. You bring some references for your research methodology in chapter 3. But in chapter 4, you may use references, but it's no raw or no new data.
What is the difference between a research problem and question?
Okay. A research problem and a research question, if you have your research problem well defined, it should be approximately on the same kind of words. But a research problem is a little bit more messy. So the way you look at state a research problem is by saying, this occurs, and there are positive consequences, so I want to improve it, or negative consequences, so I want to reduce that. So a thing is, there's a lack of understanding around the relationship between wellness and performance. Therefore, people do not spend enough attention on wellness. They don't understand the benefits. And the research question that you phrase in that would be, to what extent or how is there a relationship between wellness and performance? So it's not quite the same thing. Your problem is stated in, this is happening, these are the consequences. On the other side, exactly the same words are used to describe your research aim. I want to address these problems in order to. But your question is now much more precise. Remember that woolly bit, it's into a question format. This is what I'm going to drive my question about. So a problem is stated into statement, consequences. A question is stated into a what, a how, something around that. To what extent, and with a question mark at the end. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's a very, very thin line. It's got to deal with the same. But a research problem does not drive research. Something you want to answer drives it. Your fundamental, if you have good research questions, you will do good research. It's about getting to something and substantiating something that you can do research on. And about finding out as early as possible whether answering these questions will get you the degree you want. Or are you going to do all this work thinking that you're at a doctoral level and end up by somebody telling you, you know, this is great stuff. It's worth at least 3 different master's degrees, but it's not at a doctoral level. I've been in an examination panel last week where that was said to somebody. Great stuff. Wonderful stuff. Lots of hard work. No contribution at doctoral level. You don't want to be there. You want to be able to find those questions and be able to build an argument that you know from the start that you are going to contribute. So it's a very mechanistic approach. It's a pain to do. But if you've done it, you'll be able to structure the rest. Any other person that wants to try and reduce the deadness in their faces? The scaredness? What will happen now is we will paste, I will make sure that somehow the examples are pasted on the wiki. Okay? Hopefully by tomorrow I'll be able to work out how we're going to do it now that Professor Barry isn't there. You will look at those examples. Take them one by one. It may not be in your field and how people have done it. Okay. Look at that and try and understand exactly what you must do and what is expected of you. Then try and attempt to do this assignment. You should do that about simultaneously that you're analyzing the literature. And if you're not finding literature, that analysis should enable you to know where you need more literature. Because it's now a much more smaller area. So what do I mean with? You can find literature around that. And you're building up your sources of information and your references. Even if there could be no references in your overall question, specifically addressing it, there will be literature addressing some of those smaller questions in there. But try and put them together and try and run them simultaneously. So we don't want you to really be able to only spend 1 week on that. You'll be doing this continuously. And through this, you will now be adding literature that you will have to analyze before you can do assignment 4. At the end of this episode, if you're at a doctoral level, you'll have at least 50 references. If you're at a master's level, you'll have at least 30 meaningful references. If you don't have that, there's a very, very good chance that from the start, what you're putting together gets failed. You read introduction. This is the way you examine. Introduction. Conclusion. Aligned, okay. References. Detail of the introduction. Detail of the literature. Detail of the design. Detail of the things. Confirm that everything is aligned. References all the way. I mark with my laptop next to me, checking out references all the way. Do that. Put it together. That's the way you get examined. And I'm a real cow when I examine. Anybody that I've examined will know that I'm a particular, but I'm not the only one.
Thanks for letting us know.
I'm not the only one. At least I bothered to tell you why I'm upset. Some people would just fail you. And there's a lot of people that just fail you and they don't articulate where the problem is. So we're trying to give you detailed information where your problems might be. Is that the end? Are you dead? Sorry?
All I can say from my side, with the copy that we got today in some companies, I think we could do to the literature source where we're supposed to get. We were not keen in slotting in the correct keywords. But with the coaching that gave us today, probably.
Yeah. No, it's this process. Remember, you're not going to, nobody expects you to get 100% for assignment 1. It counts for marks. But ultimately, it's about the feedback that you get from there and the way you improve that. That's important. We want you to have good proposals. And we want you to know from the beginning, step by step, that the steps you are following may be leading to a good proposal. Because if we start and you say, okay, go after writing it, you're not going to get feedback. Some of your supervisors will just tell you, it's great. It's great. You can do nothing with it's great. And at the end they look at it and say, it's not good enough. It happens. Okay. Thanks, guys. I'll see you over 2 weeks.